Okay, it is 7:01 on June 28th, and we'll call the meeting to order, and we'll start with our land acknowledgement. As we gather here today, we acknowledge we are in Treaty 6 territory and homeland of the Métis. We pay our respect to the First Nations and Métis ancestors of that place and reaffirm our relationship with one another. We'll start with late items, and there's a couple here. There is a request from a business in town, which will go under 7.5. Then 5.4 is a discussion on, so it'll go into committee of the whole, discussion on Canada Day, and just some requests for direction on that. 6.9 will be the bylaw regarding the temporary closure of Orange Avenue for the parade of Canada Day. And I was going to add deputy mayor on here. We didn't do it last meeting just because you weren't here, but Jordan's not here today, so I'm not even gonna add it. But just know that that is coming down the works. And then there is one more item to add into camera, which we'll discuss once we get there. Okay? Go ahead.
One more thing before you decide this, I'll leave the room because I'm in conflict on one of them. But can we add just a couple questions under committee of the whole for public works?
Sure.
And on the deputy mayor one, Jordan was already deputy. Should we continue with that maybe? Everyone else is here because
No, because he should still be able to vote,
time.
right? Because if we're going to vote to who it's going to be. And what we decided last meeting was that we wanted everybody here to make that decision. So,
but then what happens if somebody's not here next meeting again, right?
Then it just keeps going.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, that's why hopefully everyone can make it.
Just leave it on there and make some comments at that point.
The what?
Leave the deputy on there and I'll make some comments at that point.
Okay, sure. So let's add that into committee of the whole. So that will be 5.5, and then public works will be 5.6. Committee of the whole. That's good for you, Councillor Clausen?
Yes.
Okay, great. Any other late items today? Okay, so we'll just need a motion to adopt the agenda, please.
I move to adopt the agenda as presented. Second.
Okay, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say nay. Motion is carried. All right, we move on to 3.1, which is motion to approve June 14th, 2022.
So move.
Seconder.
I'll second.
Okay, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say nay. Motion is carried. We move on to 3.2, which is June 21st, 2022, special meeting minutes.
I'll move to accept.
I'll second it.
Okay, seconded by Councillor Hiskey. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say nay. Motion is carried. We move to delegations and public hearings. Motion to suspend regular meeting of council. Enter public hearing. Okay, at 7:04 p.m. Seconder.
I'll second.
Okay.
Right to take
Councillor
it.
Cuddery on that one. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say nay. Motion is carried. We went to the public hearing and we convened the hearing and for the public hearing for the following bylaws, which for bylaws number 660/22, bylaw 661/22 being a bylaw to amend the official community plan, bylaw 57116, and bylaw 662/22 being the bylaw to amend zoning bylaw 57216, the closed portion of Tremblay Street and redesignate the portion of zone to MU, MR, and C3. We'll go to Mr. Bender here to give us any further summarization or anything else to add to the hearing tonight.
As for the public hearing, I haven't received any communication from any residents or concerns, so nothing additional to add.
Okay. And
Have the residents directly being affected, they were notified specifically?
I guess there's 3 properties that we identified as being affected, both adjacent property owners, as well as one across the street. And we sent them letters directly to advise them as the bylaws are being adopted and road being closed. We haven't received any communication.
okay, and there's nobody, the applicant's not here, so one can move past that. There's nobody that's present today that wants to speak on behalf of this. Okay, so we can move on past that, and so we'll just need a motion to close the public hearing and reconvene regular meeting of council.
No second.
Okay, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say nay. Okay, the motion is carried. We'll move on to
Committee of the whole.
committee of the whole. Thank you.
I'll move to enter committee of the whole.
I'll second that.
Okay, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye, all opposed say nay. Okay, the motion is carried. We move on to 5.2, which is the June 19th civil emergency debrief, and that's been requested by Councillor Vedri. Councillor Vedri, you have the floor. Is that you?
5.2.
No.
No?
Something about the fuel being accessible during the.
Oh, the fuel part. Yeah, sorry, I didn't quite understand that. So, when we had our community shut down there because of what was happening out at Far Reserve, I was leaving town and there was people stuck at the gas station, and these were tourists that were just going through, and they could not get fuel. And I think, you know, if we're thinking about the community safety, we also have to take into account our tourist safety as well, right? Couldn't tell them where to go, anything like that, right? So whether or not we have, you know, a gas station set up that will take those kind of people, I think would be good, and it could be tasked to the EOC to look at as well, to have a plan in place when that kind of stuff happens.
Chief Cloud, are you on the call?
Hello, yes, I am here.
Is there anything in the EOC manual that has any stipulations for anything of this nature, or is this something that's, again, another new chapter that would have to be written?
I don't know if it needs to be written. That this isn't really in our emergency plan. That would most likely just fall under our CMP guidelines and how they operate. Normally, it's not going to take a long time for that type of situation to end. And like you've seen, it was only just a couple hours. So activating an EOC for something like that I might question as to what we would really want to accomplish at that point. There's not really too much that we could do, and it's probably just best to leave it to RCMP.
So the residents were told to, you know, stay indoors, to protect themselves from harm, and we had tourists sitting out at the Co-op gas station in Mayor-Ronge, and they had, you know, of course they would have been alerted on their phone, but they have nowhere to go, so, and it was longer than 2 hours. It was probably around 4 hours that it lasted for.
Yeah, certainly. So at that point, it's important to just kind of follow the guidelines or the information from the RCMP and the SAS alert. So in that case, it was just shelter in place. They didn't really have a timeline, so if they were at the gas station, they should have just stayed inside and kind of just wait for further instruction.
Well, they only had their vehicles, and I understand this isn't going to happen all the time, but they were actually traveling through La Ronge, right? So they had no shelter, all they had was their vehicle. So if we're calling that a shelter with windows, people sitting in a vehicle, I don't understand how they would be protected.
Yeah, ideally, like if they were out of business, they would just kind of go into business and just shelter in place in there.
The Co-op locked down.
But again, it's just, we need to make sure that we're following our CMP guidelines when they issue out those alerts, and that's kind of above my expertise, if I'm honest.
Does anybody at this table have suggestions or something that they want to see changed or directing administration to fulfill?
I think it'd be prudent, I think, to just forward this complaint to the RCMP and say this situation existed. Perhaps in the future, if there's an emergency, maybe they could post a member at the gas bar in case people are passing through. You know, if you get an empty tank, you can't go anywhere, and, you know, so you're basically a sitting duck in the community.
Right, so I guess with that, it's just if administration could talk to Lake Country Co-op and just say when this situation occurs, right? Allow people to gas up, but then the other side of that coin is what if one of those people gassing up is the aggressor in the situation, right? Mm-hmm. And they're unknowingly exposing employees and other customers to potential threats of violence. So I don't know. at one point, if we have like a tornado or whatever other thing happening, we do have an emergency shelter, which is the airport, or is it the Uniplex? Does anybody remember? I'm pretty sure it's the airport in case of emergency. Maybe we direct tourists, you know, in case of emergency, go to this location until the emergency's over.
Councillor Weber?
I guess that's another thing, like,
Excuse me.
I can appreciate, say, go into the co-op and hunker down in there, but they didn't even have that option because it was already closed at the time, eh? So yeah, I'd like to see something looked at and in place for the future, so we don't have our tourists sitting at a gas station not being able to go anywhere, because it doesn't really reflect well on the community, and we do want to, you know, have tourists coming through.
So,
Frankly, I can reach out to maybe Staff Sergeant Rydell, and maybe just if you guys would like, we can invite him as a delegation and have a debrief. But it's just important. I just want to stress that when something like that happens, it's on the fly, right? So those shots happen pretty much immediately, and the RCMP's decision was to issue a SAS alert. And then in that case, that's pretty much all that they can do for getting out information quickly to let people know what's going on. And then there was subsequent other SAS alerts that were issued, but I think it's best if we kind of direct these questions to the RCMP on this matter, in my opinion.
okay. I think just what I'm hearing at this table is that we're missing a person in this conversation to help facilitate what we want to have happen, or even just from what they're thinking to give us a debrief. So, Chief Cloud, if you wouldn't mind, just from us reaching out to RCMP and facilitating that, and then coming back to council would be great.
Yeah, I can reach out for next council meeting.
Okay, excellent. Does that suffice for everybody? Okay, excellent. We're moving on to 5.3, which is the wastewater treatment plant study. And we have two gentlemen that are to my left here. And do you guys want to speak on behalf of the study?
For sure. Thank you for inviting us tonight to speak on this study. My name is Jason Stusik, and I'm with MPE Engineering in Saskatoon. And in November, we were retained by the town to complete a study on the wastewater treatment plant. There were three components of the study. One was to look at the condition assessment, which was basically how the plant is currently, like its current state and how it's operating. The next portion of work was to do what we call the downstream impact and user study, and that basically determines the impact of the wastewater treatment plant on Lac La Ronge. And the final part of the studies were a feasibility study. So we look at different options for improving your wastewater treatment plant and looking at what the capital cost of those improvements are and what the life cycle costs are over time. I'll let Brady maybe go and start off here with we have a quick presentation. We'll try to be around 15 minutes if that works. And we also have one person online who's Chris Nemeth, and he's the hydrology engineer, did the downstream user impact. He's got a couple of things to add. So.
Yeah, so just run through basically the three reports we completed. Hopefully through with you guys. So initially we began by reviewing historical data from the plant, so like historical flows, wastewater loadings, just for like the heat parameters. Next, we reviewed the existing wastewater treatment plant and recommended improvements that we made to the plant, basically to get it running as intended when it was designed in 2003 when upgrades were completed. Next, we completed the downstream use impact study, which basically determines the end of pipe limits that a future plant must meet, like that is up to today's regulatory standards. And then once we completed that, we went into looking at other technologies that are suitable to meet these new limits that will likely be put in place for you guys' next permit to operate the facility. And so part of that, we put together a feasibility study with capital cost estimates and operation costs for a couple of different treatment technologies that are suitable for the town. So the wastewater treatment plant, I'm sure as all you know, is just located on the east side of town. It discharges through the Muskeg into McGibbon Bay, Lac La Ronge. So initially we reviewed the historical data provided by the town. This was completed so we could project a 20-year design period for the plant, just so that we know what this plant needs to be able to treat in order to last for 20 years. From this, we developed design criteria that the plant must be able to meet, as well as, I guess, effluent criteria, which is developed in the downstream use impact study. Next slide, please. So for the population projections, the RFP required us to complete the design for the 20-year design. So as you can see, in the last couple of years, the town's population has declined, but based on the town's infrastructure master plan, we used a growth rate of 1%, which would put our 2041 design population at 3,447. Next slide, please. So for the flow that the plant must handle, it was based off basically the projected population at 20 years and the historical flows that we've seen from data collected by the town. So that puts our flow, our design flow for the biological system based off the max month flow. Just to be kind of conservative, you don't design based off like your peak instantaneous flow, because that's something that we're going to see every 50 years like that. Next slide, please. As for the design of the plant, historical data was used for some key parameters, but these parameters were not what's typically seen in wastewater for municipalities. It was just significantly lower, and that's likely due to high amount of infiltration in the town. So we use more conservative values just to ensure that the plant can handle anything basically that the town can expect in the future. Next slide. As from this, we just developed basically the design criteria. We can just kind of skip over this slide here. So the first thing we did, a part of these three studies, was the condition assessment of the wastewater treatment plant. So for this, we looked at the treatment and hydraulic capacity of the system, as well as basically all the equipment inside the plant. So the building, all the pumps, blowers, motors, piping, valves, and then all the electrical equipment, as well as the above ground steel tanks. Next slide. So first we looked at historical data of the plant. So this is like the treated effluent total suspended solids from the plant. So the line in purple there is the current limit, which is 25 milligrams per liter. So as you can see, if you look at the blue dots, like a significant amount of those samples are not meeting the effluent limits in the permit to operate. And then the line in red is, we'll touch on that in the downstream use impact study, but that's the what we expect the future limit to be. So there's a significant amount of days that the effluent is not meeting the required suspended solids. Next slide, please. And then just the same thing for carbonaceous biological demand. So again, just the town's not meeting the requirements of the permit to operate.
So with these BOD and TSS, those are just a measurement of the polluting strength of the wastewater. So essentially what this shows is just your plant's not performing how it should. So you're exceeding the limits currently coming for your treated effluent from the plant.
Yeah, and the 25 limit is basically what the plant was designed to in 2003 when upgrades were completed then. So it's just not meeting those limits currently. Next slide. So here is just another, I guess, data. Basically, it's just your
process. It's like a process for how operators should watch, and usually you want to keep your SVIs, like how quickly your sludge will settle in your mechanical plant, but you want to be in that 200 to 300 range, and typically your average is quite a higher than that. So you're having a lot of trouble with your with the operation of your facility right now. It's not settling out as it should, the sludge or the mixed liquor, and it's carrying over into the treated effluent. So that's kind of that and the gist of that.
Is some of that attributed to the water that's put through the wastewater system from the water treatment plant, or from rain runoff in storm sewers or anything like that? Or?
Yeah, like it's the infiltration and the backwash water do impact that. More like in this case here, more particularly, it's being able to waste sludge from the system. So basically, you have the systems operating, and then it's you waste sludge from the main reactor into the digester, but the time that the sludge spends in there is too long. And so basically, one of the recommendations was to waste out of the plant, like start hauling more sludge, waste sludge from the plant to the lagoons where you're disposing currently.
So does it make more challenging, a lot more challenging when you got the extra water coming in that just.
Yes, for sure. If you had a stronger strength and stuff, you probably, this would improve. Plus your, you'd have more food to microorganism, your food to microorganism ratio would be kind of fall in line and stuff. So it's a little weak coming in, but your strength of sewage to keep the process going. But there's a couple of things that are going, and we'll kind of hit that in the next couple of slides here.
Yeah, so here's kind of our main recommendation for operations. So these ones don't really have like a cost impact to them, I guess, besides the hauling of sludge. So the first was just to remove the RAS pumps. This was kind of a design oversight in 2003 when they upgraded the plant from an extended aeration to a sequencing batch reactor plant. Basically, these pumps aren't required for this kind of treatment, which basically returns sludge from like the biological treatment from the clarifier back to the biological treatment, but with what it's doing now, it's basically returning sludge that needs to be taken out of the process back into the process. So then that old sludge doesn't settle and you end up with basically that just going out into your effluent into the lake. The next recommendation was just on the amount of sludge that should be wasted per week. So currently, basically every 2 to 3 months, they're wasting probably 20 cubic meters of sludge, but our, like, based on the numbers, our recommendation is 52 cubic meters of sludge per year. So there's definitely some cost impacts for operations, wasting that much sludge. There are things that can be done to decrease that volume by adding sludge thickening to the system, which decreases that significantly. But currently it'll increase the cost for the town. Next recommendation we had was just on the WAS pumps. Just those are based off a time set point, operating at the time. These pumps run that long each cycle. So that's just to get the amount of sludge we want wasted per week. So the plant is operating.
So optimize the plant hours. So we went through with the operators on these, and some of them they've been implementing.
Yeah, I think they've already implemented basically everything on here. And then the last 2 recommendations are just to verify some elevations of some key equipment in the plant, which they've already done. So I think all these have been put in place. It will take a couple of months before you really see a difference with the wasting sludge, but I'm sure sometime down the road you should see a significant difference in the treatment. Next slide, please. So next we had upgrade recommendations for more process equipment, which has a cost associated to it. So first issue is flow meters at the plant, 1 out of 3 are functioning. So there's 2 influent ones, one's functioning, and then the other influent one and effluent flow meters are not functioning. So those should be replaced just so that accurate flow measurement is had at the plant. The next one's just to upgrade the WAS pumps. Currently these pumps plug up due to rags, and they also freeze in winter, so that eliminates the operator's ability to waste sludge, and the plant can't operate as intended. So that causes process issues when you can't meet your effluent requirements. The last issue is the high infiltration, which is kind of associated with the water treatment plant there. So in order to increase the food to microorganism ratio, a carbon feed skin could be added. So these recommendations we have in order, basically how they should be implemented, and the ones with asterisks beside could be used in a future upgrade or a capital expansion. So next we reviewed the facility mechanical life portions of the plant. Basically the entire plant is at the end of its service life, so pretty much everything in the plant needs to be replaced. The only thing of value there is the generator, which we'll be able to use in a future plant to power the plant during power outages. Next slide, please. So one other assessment we completed was on the above ground steel tank. So this we completed ultrasonic thickness testing, basically to determine how much the tanks have corroded during their lifespan. So like the one tank was constructed in 1978, the other in 1989. So basically based off the thickness testing we completed, our structural engineers completed basically a calculation on how long these tanks will last, and the remaining life is 19 years. And that's basically just with leaving the tanks as is and not touching them. But by adding like a new epoxy coating, new insulation on the exterior of the tanks, the life can be extended basically to like 30 years, so that it'll last basically the life cycle of your new plant. So by being able to utilize these existing tanks, it's saving approximately $2 million. Next slide, please.
The big thing is like where it's located and stuff, bedrock and stuff, is construction is difficult, so if you're able to save these tanks, that's a huge benefit for your major capital upgrade.
1.9 million.
What's that?
Like 1.9 million.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's just a quick cost estimate basically for like the recommendations we have, basically that should be completed like soon, which will basically get the plant to run as it was designed in 2003. So these upgrades won't like improve the performance of the plant drastically, that you'll be able to meet new limits. It'll just get you back to where you need to be to meet your current limits.
That's the next slide.
Yeah, so just to wrap up that kind of report, the existing plant cannot meet current regulatory standards. With these upgrades, it should be able to meet the current permit to operate. Once that is revised in 2025, the plant won't be able to meet those requirements. And a large capital upgrade will be required in order to like improve the treatment technology to be able to meet those limits. And then, yeah, there's just some of those upgrades will be able to use in the future plants, so you won't be losing capital there by doing upgrades in the existing facility. Next slide, please.
So here we'll get into the downstream use and impact study. We have a hydrologist and civil engineers. Chris will walk us through this quickly. Chris, can you keep it to 5 minutes or less, if you don't mind?
Yeah, sure. Just assuming you guys have the section number 4 downstream use and impact study slide set up here, I'll just kind of walk you guys through it. So essentially a downstream use and impact study is a requirement of the Water Security Agency for any new or upgraded wastewater facilities. So the main purpose of it is to assess the assimilation capacity of the receiving water body to basically determine and ensure that any new system or upgraded system and whatnot does not have an adverse effect on the water body itself or adversely affect the uses of the water body. So some of the main components of the study are to determine the size and characteristics of the mixing zone at the outfall of the wastewater treatment plant to the lake, as well as to generate site-specific water quality objectives. And the main item is to recommend end-of-pipe limits for the wastewater treatment plant. That's then used by Water Security Agency to regulate the facility. So you go to the next slide, please. So just a brief summary of the outlet path of the existing facility and what would be assumed to be the upgraded facility. So currently, treated effluent is discharged into the nearby Muskeg area, and then it flows through Muskeg and eventually travels into the Gibbon Bay in Lac La Ronge. Next slide, please. So one of the main items of the study is to review previous water quality samples to characterize the existing water quality. So this is used as a benchmark to assess the mixing and dilution of the treated effluent, as well as to give us a baseline for what's there now and to use for comparing. So overall, we reviewed sample data for a number of parameters, but in wastewater, the main parameters that we're concerned with are phosphorus, total suspended solids, BOD, which is biochemical oxygen demand, as well as nutrients and coliforms, which are basically just bacteria such as E. coli. Next slide, please. So I think to no one's real surprise, Lac La Ronge is a high quality receiving water body, and there's no parameters above generic surface water quality guidelines. So these guidelines are objectives set up by the Water Security Agency, as well as numerous watershed associations, be it the North Sask River Watershed Association, and there's numerous other ones. So that being said, it kind of becomes twofold. There's lots of assimilation capacity within water body, but at the same time too, we do want to make sure the water body remains a high quality water body and that we aren't doing anything to adversely affect it. Next slide, please. So, just a quick summary on Lac La Ronge. So the surface area altogether is about 1,400 square kilometers. There's about 20 million cubic decimeters of water. The catchment area is about 15,500 square kilometers, and it's ultimately a tributary to the Churchill River. And with it, being a tributary to the Churchill River, we have to consider all downstream current and potential uses. So the main ones being, recreation, aquatic life. There is some potential mining uses as well as municipal uses. So for the purposes of completing the assessment, we looked at it from all fronts there. Next slide, please. So I'll just give a brief overview of the procedures that we followed, just to get us to the main conclusion here. So a mass balance assessment was done, which was basically to compare what the surface water quality objectives are to what we can feasibly release into the lake. And for that, you do a hydrology review, you look at your annual inflows, your annual outflows, you take a small fraction of that and then basically mix it up together and see how much can we put into the lake so that this fraction doesn't exceed what the limits are. So that was completed. We also compared the receiving environment to other effluent guidelines. So Saskatchewan doesn't have any specific guidelines for that, however Alberta does, which basically is a guideline for a certain type of technology, what it can feasibly achieve and be regulated at. So that was used more so as a comparison, as well as we completed or developed a mixing zone model. And the main purpose of the model is to model the discharge into the lake to see, okay, at what distance is everything fully mixed and diluted, just so you don't have a plume of effluent, stuck to the shoreline and going up a beach or a public park area or anything. So those are the three approaches that were taken. Next slide, please. So following the mass balance assessment, with La Ronge, being so large, even when you take 5% of it, of the annual inflow and mixing with the effluent, we can still mix away a significant amount of treated effluent. That being said, it wouldn't be recommended to regulate a facility at such levels. This is kind of an absolute worst case. Next slide, please. So ultimately, to compare our limits to the guidelines, we looked at Water Security Agency limits, other federal guidelines, and whatnot. Next slide. So to sum up the mixing zone model, the mixing zone extends approximately 150 meters downstream of the outfall in a given bay. And at the end of this 150 meters, all effluent parameters are reduced by 97%. So the levels are only 3% above the background levels, which is very good. So for example, if you go to the next slide here, this plot is just an example of an output from the model, just showing the different concentrations as you get further away. So it gets more diluted the further you get.
May I interrupt with a question?
Sure, yeah.
In layman's terms, 153 meters from the outfall is where? Is it in the middle of the houses, past the houses?
150
The
meters
docks?
out
Yeah.
would be, I think it would be, it's still in the bay at that point, is it not? Yeah. Yeah. And what he's showing here is that there's, with regards to any aquatic life and anything, there's actually no acute lethality right around where they would have any impact on aquatic life. And then you see the nutrient reduction or pollutant reduction to, like basically 97%. Like at 150 meters out, it's like the regular lake at that point in time.
So all the way out to the end of McGibbon Bay, which is a few miles to the end of it, there's, from the air, you can see a distinct different color of water, like a green kind of sludgy looking water,
Yeah.
like algae, and actually around the rest of the lake, multiple miles away, a lot of people are noticing excessive algae compared to previous years. Does any of that have to do with what we're putting into the lake?
The phosphorus would and nitrogen would. So like usually algae, the limiting nutrient is phosphorus. So if you have increased phosphorus moving through your system, that will impact the lake, and then you get eutrophication where you get the algae growth.
So the green plume going out of McGibbon Bay
can be a result from the nutrients released from the wastewater plant, but there's also, you know, if you have storm outfalls, other point sources that might be causing it too. But like with the phosphorus leaving the plant, and you don't have any really way of removing it like it currently, it would just make its way. Basically, whatever comes in, and usually it's around 7 milligrams per liter, it would go out at that same amount. And typical new regulations limit it. WSA will limit it to 0.5 to 1 milligram per liter. So you'd be putting out a fair bit more than what would be allowed in a new design. Versus
and that being said, these results in our downstream study here, these are based on our proposed limits for what a new facility would be. This isn't the model of the existing facility. So yeah, like Jason said, the nutrients such as phosphorus and nitrogen would contribute to your algae blooms and whatnot.
Is there any way to neutralize that, say in the bay?
Well, over time, basically, phosphorus just gets uptaken by plant life, and then it's kind of fixed. So it never can be like destroyed or converted into some other form. So essentially, usually most municipalities look at just removing the point source. So like you would remove phosphorus within the treatment process itself and not have it end up in the lake. And then usually over a period of years, the lake itself will uptake that phosphorus, the nutrients, and then it would be kind of restored back to more of an original point before you were actually discharging wastewater into it. So like there's places where you have 40 years or 50 years of operation where there's phosphorus and it takes decades for it to eventually work its way through the system. So
what you're saying with the new plant, we won't have that phosphorus entering into the system?
you would stop discharging phosphorus. Okay. Essentially, or reduce it to a point where the impact is very minimal on the water body.
Yeah. Okay, what slide do I have up there? Is
the TSS effluent plume?
Yeah, okay.
With the distance?
So yeah, okay. If you go to the next one, it should be a graph for TSS effluent plume as well.
We're at the end of pipe limits, Chris.
My apologies.
Right. Oh, okay. Yes, if you go back one, there's the graph. It just shows that, with the new facility that, even within the bay where it's first discharged, it drops off quite quickly. So, I mean, we have 150 some odd meters to be reduced by 97%, but, with what the limits that we're proposing, you can tell the vast majority of it, like 90% or so, would be discharged within 20 meters. So that's quite beneficial. So go to the next slide here. This is basically what the whole study is there to determine, which is our end of pipe recommended to maintain the water quality and everything. So our recommended end of pipe limits are 10 milligrams per liter for BOD. 10 milligrams per liter for total suspended solids, 5 and 10 for ammonia in summer and winter. And the reason that's different is just because the water temperature has an effect on, the effect of the ammonia on the water body. The total phosphorus of 1 milligram per liter, fecal coliform of 100, and then pH within the range, but that shouldn't be an issue. So this is the main conclusion of the report, and these recommended end of pipe limits would then be taken into consideration for any future upgrade projects and also used by the Water Security Agency to regulate the new facility. So As far as future upgrades, Jason will speak to that right away here. If we could go to the next slide here. Basically the conclusion is if these are implemented as part of an upgraded system, continuous discharge of the effluent, that are at or below these limits will not degrade the receiving environment, and like Jason mentioned in terms of nutrients and whatnot, you will see more of a return to historical average conditions with lower phosphorus loading and less algae and whatnot. The other factor here too is the muskeg will provide an additional level of treatment. However, that's not considered part of the treatment process. It's just kind of just an extra fact there. So I'll turn it back over to Jason here, and then he can talk about some of the recommended upgrades.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. So basically, all the background work we just completed is what basically determines what path the town has to go to treat their wastewater. So it's kind of all the background work just to tell you what type of processes you need. So the one main thing is that the current wastewater treatment plant, even if it was working properly, will not meet the effluent limits that will be required and will be regulated by WSA, your regulator. So a major capital project is required. So I'll kind of rip through these other ones here, but we looked at 4 different treatment technologies. So currently you have a mechanical plant, it's an SBR, so it's a batch reactor. We looked at extended aeration, aerobic granular sludge, and an aerated lagoon and nitrification cells. So we looked at different technologies that would produce the quality effluent that is required by the downstream users and impact study. We can go to the next slide there. So one part of an upgrade, newer facilities, you're going to want to put in like influence flow measurement. You'll want to have screenings to remove rags and floatables. You'll want to remove grit. And then we also want to include phosphorus reduction, and usually it's done through chemical precipitation. So you would add like a chemical like alum, which will bind with the phosphorus, and it'll be able to settle it out and waste it through the sludge. Finally, you'll do a disc filter and UV disinfection or post-treatment ones where it cleans up the water, and UV will get you to reduce your fecal and total coliform counts. And finally, with wastewater, you have a solids and a liquid one, so you should do something with sludge management, which at a minimum you should look at sludge thickening. And if you still have an ability to take and truck out liquid sludge, then the town can do that. If you can't do that, your next step will be to do dewatering, which you would then take your sludge to a landfill. So those are kind of some of those things that you'd have to figure out is your final sludge location. And then like currently you're going to a neighbor's lagoon there, is that going to be feasible going forward? So those would be some steps you would take moving past this. Next slide there. We can go on. These are just some photos from there. What we did is basically all the mechanical plants have they're similar, they're just a slightly different technology. We can reuse your steel tanks there, so that's a good part of it. So what we're proposing is you can basically do these extra processes in a upper and lower floor building to match your hydraulic grade line. You're currently pumping from your lift station, so you have a high water level. So basically we'd still be able to maintain that hydraulic grade line, which means you wouldn't have to pump and have that additional energy cost. And then we'd be able to go from screening grit removal into your current bioreactors, and then back through filtration and UV disinfection through your existing outfall. Next one there. So these are just some process flow diagrams. I did bring like a set of notes like on all these slides, so I can just leave them here if you guys were interested. And these diagrams are all on it. I won't go through them here, but it's basically all the processes required for each of the alternatives. And the main thing, you can go to the next slide. The main thing is there's a slightly different technology that we'd incorporate into the bioreactors. So the 3 ones is making use of those bioreactors. Currently it's an SBR. This is how we're showing it. This is how we interrupt the flow. As you can see, the footprint of the new facility is still pretty much on site, and we wouldn't be impacting the area down there as much. You can go on to the next one. Extended aeration, another process we can incorporate into the existing reactors, and you can go on to the next slide. And the same thing, the building will be roughly the same. Extended aeration, SBR, and AGS are all processes, biological processes that'll work in this application. And you can go on to the next one. And so you can see that very much that these technologies are utilizing your existing infrastructure. And the last one we did want to look at, because there might be questions, like if you go to the municipal conferences and that, if you go into the next slide, and the next one from there, is aerated lagoons and nitrification cells. So a lot of communities, especially if you have land and you're set up that way, you can go into basically an aerated lagoon. So you basically have aerated cells, like usually 2 cells, and then you have like a nitrification cell or the Sager system. So you might run into like Nexum, and it's a good system too, but you can see the size of the lagoons you would need to operate like the mechanical plant you have right now. So it's a significant earthworks project, and you need to clear a lot of land, you need a flat land. If you move it to somewhere else, then you have to reconfigure out all your lift stations and how they flow into here, because everything right now comes to this wastewater treatment plant. So you don't really want to increase the size of your project by moving. Like ideally we find with municipalities, if we can keep the same site and keep the same discharge location, then we actually can keep our capital costs reasonable, because these systems are quite expensive. These will be one of the most expensive projects that a town can take on.
And that would completely limit growth into those areas.
Yeah.
Inside the blue line,
Yeah.
right?
It just doesn't seem feasible from our point of view. We kind of we got the comments of from administration and operations wanting, like maybe we should look at this just to, that people are curious about it. Yeah. And the costs, you can see when we get to the costs, like these, it's just really not feasible. So these are the capital costs for each of these. Basically 1, 2, and 3 are very similar systems, but the SBR with the mechanical upgrade, it's currently operating this facility how it is right now. So there's less equipment to upgrade. We can maintain more in the tanks, and your operators are already familiar with that process. So like 1, 2, and 3 are all roughly fairly close. Area lagoon I don't think is really feasible there. And that's really not even including land costs. I guess the town owns it, so you can go on to the next slide. So in here, we just look at like funding programs. Like these projects won't happen without funding. Like they're significant, and most municipalities cannot take these on. So usually the big program right now, they come out in intervals, is Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program, ICIP, and that's the typical layout for those projects there. So you can see in option 1, the municipal contributions in the order of $4.3 million is what the municipal cost share would be if you were successful in getting funding for this project. One thing is though, the town's already in a good position. Like you've engaged a consultant to do these studies, so you've completed your condition assessment, you completed your downstream users and impact study, and you completed an engineering feasibility study. So you can use these documents in support of your application, and then the regulators and the funding agencies will know, okay, this is good, you've looked at everything, council's all on board for this particular option, and this is a feasible project. So you're already in a good place now, and it's just a matter of a waiting game for funding. The last slide here looks at the net present value. So this is really looking at like the life cycle costs over time. And we're only looking at the operation costs, so you can see at operating the facility over 20. If you had a debenture, or your $4.4 million that you have to pick in for capital, then it'll cost roughly another $7 million over 20 years to operate. So you're roughly the whole net present value. And that's how you compare projects, is around $11 million or $12 million, I guess, for the SBR. So that roughly works out at $1.50 per cubic meter of waste coming in. So, and that's the cheapest option, I guess. So, and the last one I think is, these are just a comparison. We can pass through this one here. And then it just, basically the feasibility study, and it's still in draft form, is select the SBR for treatment and construct a new building, incorporate some pre-treatment and post-treatment, and look at sludge management. So, and the last, I think, we had a project schedule if people are interested. If you were to get funding now, you likely wouldn't have a project complete until the end of 2025. So these take a while to do. Usually it'll take you a year to design it, and then it'll take 2 years to tender and construct the project. So these are a long haul project. And the last one there is just basically some conclusions there. So which we've kind of gone over through already, but that's basically all these documents summed up. Sorry we took a little bit longer time.
So you're recommending option one primarily on cost or effectiveness?
But all of those treatment processes, all four, will give you the same effluent quality that's required by the limits that we've. Each of them will work on it, and yes, so basically, they all work, and then you look at it kind of in operations, operations, okay, they're familiar with how the system is there, and then cost. So life cycle costs over the period of time, and that's how you kind of make your decision.
So if we were able to control the amount of water going in, what would that change? Life of the facility, or would it change? What would it change?
Let's say over time you've decreased your infiltration and you change where your backwash goes, you'd increase your capacity of your plant, which would then give you more time. So then you can, instead of a 20-year design horizon and a population of 3,500, you might be able to have a population of 4,500 people being able, that system would work for.
Anybody else have any questions? I have a question. You mentioned about the upgrades. So the upgrades, is that something that can be done in the interim and quite quickly, so that we do meet our requirements for those?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, most of them are, and it's we worked with operations to try each step. So if you're getting closer to it, because one of them we had add carbon, which would be adding methanol to increase your carbon in your wastewater, your influent wastewater. If you don't need to do that, then you wouldn't need to spend that money there. So just kind of step 1, 2, 3, and try them. And if you get to where you need to be, then that's where you stop, and then you wait until you get your funding, just so you're not spending too much money on an old plant.
Right.
So when you were costing option one, was that with the concrete tanks, or was that refurbishing the old one?
That would be refurbishing the 2 ones that are there right now, and those costs are in there. Plus we applied it
on all 3 options, the first 3 options.
The first 3 options, yeah. Yeah, so you'd come in and sandblast and clean them all up, recoat them, insulate them, clad them. And I think we had a 25% contingency or 20% contingency?
Yeah, 25%.
Yeah, so if any other things come up, because we're a very initial state of this project, so there's probably a few $1 million that we call contingency. So if you had to add sludge dewatering, there'd be funds available for it. Because when you go and ask for funds, you don't want to underscope your project, and you don't want to not have enough money, because once you ask and you can't get any more.
Go back to the bank.
Yeah, exactly. So we try to keep those, and especially when it takes us several years to get a project done.
Any other questions for the gentleman today?
No.
I'm good.
Okay, thank you guys so much. We really appreciate that.
Would anybody be interested in these?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll just leave them here.
Thank you very much.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming.
Everyone.
I can also scan these tomorrow and email them over.
Is that what's on our phone now?
We can send it.
Sorry, but that's in these ones, right?
I don't know.
Not the PowerPoint, but the highlights.
The feasibility study and the application, okay.
Yeah, I can send the PowerPoint over to Lyle tomorrow.
Sure. Great, thank you so much.
Thank
Okay.
Thanks, gentlemen.
We move on to, so just really quick, just to wrap it up, just so this goes back to the administration. What is our plan now? Do we have what we're going ahead with, or?
My understanding is that this is draft, so we're approving the draft as it is, or the options that we have in front of us, and there's any changes. I'm assuming administration's gonna make changes if they want any, but from my perspective, sitting at this table, I actually read the whole report, and it was quite good, so.
Yeah, the upgrades are imminent. We don't really have a choice. We need to do that as soon as possible, because if it goes tomorrow,
We're already
No, I
in
think-
violation of what we're allowed to do.
yes,
Going
it's
out,
over
so
capacity.
there's
I think they
something.
moved the time frame. I mean, they're helping management to do what they can to keep it minimal, and even though we're not compliant, but I think we have to act fairly soon to get the, you know, get to the point where we're actually gonna move on design.
I'm not sure if you're gonna know this just because I know that you're just interim right now, but do we know, is this falling under the direction of Dwayne, who's on the call right now, or who's taking the lead on this, do we know?
Well, the budget piece would be us, right?
I don't believe this would be under Dwayne.
Okay,
It would be under Lyle and potentially Jeff
Okay.
when he's hired.
Yeah.
okay, got it.
So,
Okay, so I think that we're gonna, well, I think that you can take that back to administration, that I think the will of council is that we need to get moving, right, on this?
there's nothing,
Can I-
very-
can I
nothing
direct-
terribly exciting in there,
Yeah,
so.
go ahead.
Direct administration to investigate ISEP and or the municipal trust account for available funding and what that's gonna look like, I guess.
Well, I checked ISIP already. There isn't anything available as of yet. They come out with new streams every now and then. The only thing that they're accepting right now is landfill decommissioning, but I will
Yeah.
definitely keep my eye on that.
Continue on that, so I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
So,
I'm wondering, can this be something that we submit to like a federal minister requesting funding, or like what are the possibilities? Do we even know?
wouldn't it be better to pursue NMTA and
Yeah.
get their, support in this, cause they can,
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, the Northern Trust Account is very aware of where we're at with this project. They've been keeping in a loop, and we could touch base with them and see, you know, based on if there's no other funding, see where we're at, but they realize that it's not compliant and we have to do something.
Yeah, like
Further to that, maybe engage, I think his name's Kevin from.
Kevin Cudmore, yeah.
Yeah, from Saskwater, because they're involved in all of those funding structures and everything too, so they're aware of when they're coming out and how to pursue them, so.
so, if I understand correctly, as it stands right now, the draft that we have in front of us, nobody has any issues with that, we're accepting of that, and administration can direct the consulting firm to finalize the draft? Is that what we're doing? So that we have a final,
Yeah, I mean, I think that's,
final study to be working with and instead of presenting a draft copy.
And have a motion on the table for next meeting, which is mid-July, cause I think we really need to move on this fast.
So then further move to table, future discussion on this to our next meeting.
Yeah, and possibly have an action plan if possible.
but we can come out of committee of whole and motion today if we need to. Okay.
I think the one thing we should do is just take a copy of this report to be received and forward that to the Northern Trust Account, so just so then they can aware of what the recommendation is.
Okay, so I think that, well, then we don't need a motion for that, because we can just direct administration and then come back to us with all the findings of that. And I think also looking into our reserves too and seeing where that fits too, because I think even just with the federal, provincial, and the municipal, I think that we do, well, actually I shouldn't even assume that, but you would know because you have the numbers, but where our reserves sit with the roughly $4 million price tag.
Yeah, I mean, that is definitely doable.
Yeah. Okay, great, we're moving on. We're moving on to 5.4, which is going to be the discussion on Canada Day, so I'll open up the floor.
Okay.
Actually, you know what, I'll let you start,
Okay.
Mr. Tracy, if you don't mind, about what you already have in place and what you sort of, I don't know, I feel like a lot of stuff has happened today, but I don't know what's going on.
Right now, administration has planned a fireworks show for Canada Day, but we've heard loud and clear from the community that they're expecting more. Previous years we had multiple events happening on Canada Day downtown, the Children's Festival being the main one that hosted the event that the parade essentially led into. That's not happening. That happened on Father's Day during the lockdown. And at this point we're requesting direction for what Canada Day is requested to look like at this point. We can pull together an event rather quickly. It wouldn't be to the same scale of what the Pride Festival was or what a typical children's festival would be, but we can have an event hosted downtown that would draw people in from the parade, if we do want to have a parade, and then have a lapse in activity for the day and then bring people back to the park for fireworks.
The only thing I don't like is we left this to the last minute and we're just throwing it on Connor, and I don't think that's right as well. Because we did talk about it, Viviana, at our council meeting, and we said we'll have fireworks only.
I don't remember that.
Go ahead, Councillor.
Fireworks only.
Councillor Reese.
I'm willing, I've spoken to several people today, I'm willing to put in whatever's needed to help make that happen. I've shared that with Connor. Throwing a parade together, it's, our efforts are minimal. It's just basically saying let's meet at a certain time, at a certain place, and the parade happens. I know that the parade marshal, there's a parade marshal available and willing and ready to act. So I do remember that conversation where I had suggested that we wait to see what the band had wanted to do, and I was outvoted. Everyone said we need to celebrate Canada Day. There was a plan around fireworks, and that was great. But during the reconciliation flag raising, the chief did say that she was looking forward to us celebrating together, and because of that, I feel that we can and that we should. And the community has questions around what's happening on Canada Day. Traditionally, we have a parade and the Children's Festival activities, but those were moved. But I think we can still pull something together, and it can be something fun. Yep.
I've already spoken to Fire Chief Cloud today. He has said that he would be more than happy to lead the parade, meet at the band office and the same route as normal. We have actually been able to get the bouncy castles. Actually, to keep, the Children's Festival wanted to just give them to us with the stipulation that they can use them whenever they want. The benefit here is, we could rent them out whenever we want to do that. We do have people set up already to do face painting. We have a speaker for music to do that kind of stuff. I think right now I checked all of our liability issues with insurance with the bouncy castles. We're good to go on that. I think that right now we're pretty much set, and we just need the word from council.
What about local musicians maybe doing showcasing?
It's challenging because it is the same day as NAPTAC Ramble.
Is it?
Yeah.
So we would be essentially pulling music acts to downtown where there is an outlet for that already planned.
Sorry, Ken.
I'm totally in support. I know the community does. What's happening? And this was not necessarily something that we were thinking of anticipating. Fireworks is a tradition, and usually it's other bodies that end up working with the town, and the town supports that, which we don't have that. But I'm all in support of encouraging the use of our parks, providing a destination for families if they want to do things during the day. And what you've said you have potentially put in place is more than sufficient. And I think just a casual use of the parks and the beaches and it is a very reasonable thing to do in a parade, so that people feel like they've done their march. So I'm fine with whatever casual, smaller scale event that is just a casual use of the park to celebrate Canada Day and provide something for families to go to on a day off.
From a policy standpoint, which is what this table is supposed to be doing, we can draft a bylaw to close down the road, right? To do the
We
parade.
would have to technically close the road.
Yeah.
Parade permit, yeah.
The rest of it, at this table, someone who just did a very massive festival, it took months to plan. And to me, I don't think that it's necessarily our job to dictate what his capacity is to do. Obviously, our residents want it, but also people need to stand up and set up and create committees for this stuff, because otherwise we're just putting everything on Connor to do that. It takes a lot of manpower to or people power, I don't want to use manpower, to get this stuff going, and to do it in 3 days, I don't know, I think it's ridiculous. I think that as far as this table goes, I think we create the policy, and I agree with Councillor Bashara. We have great parks that people can come use. We have some great sponsors who are going to, do the shooting for the fireworks, and we purchase fireworks, and we can do bouncy castle, we know stuff. But I don't, at this table, I don't think that's my decision. I think that you guys are capable of what you guys do, and I think we just leave it in your hands, and we do what our job is at the table, which is policy. So if someone disagrees with that, please go ahead. But
I agree with you actually.
Okay.
Because in comments about the festival, you were very well organized, but that's because you started months ago.
Yeah, we started in March.
And
Yeah.
so just to throw something together. Plus the Ramble's happening. There's going to be lots of kids events there, and so to pull from that, even if people are thinking of going, it's we should have been planning this a long time ago if we were going to do it.
Well, there needs to be a committee. I think
Yeah.
that's.
Or yeah, a committee. I'm big on committees because
It's policy. So I think if everyone is in agreement at this table, that we leave it in your capable hands of what you guys can budget, what you guys can do, and I'll be totally happy with that. And we'll come out of, you guys can pass it around if you want. That's a draft bylaw to close the road temporarily for the parade. And we can just rally a parade. Like, meaning for the Pride Parade, I will say that it was meet this time. Nothing's organized really. We can reach out to the fire department, EMS, RCMP. They'll show up. And then people can come and bring their flags, and like, I'm in all support for that, but I just don't think that we need to be planning that at this table. That's not our job.
P-Wapping did the Family Wellness Day, same thing. It was months of organization for that.
Absolutely. I don't think it's our job.
Do we have a conversation happening with the band and the village to invite them to participate in this, or is this just the town?
Do you want to speak a little bit about what's, because you two gentlemen spoke to the band and to
I know the
right?
fireworks is all coordinated and a tri-community effort, so
With what we heard today, we paused on reaching out to them to organize something and wanted to hear council's decision tonight, but that's something that we move on early tomorrow morning.
okay.
Okay, so is everyone okay with pushing this bylaw to at least close the road, so there's a parade, and then if we want to do it outside of this table and push for a parade and show up and rally for it, cool.
I've
But
seen that. I'm good with it.
You seen it, Joe?
Temporary road closure?
Can you pass it to Joe, please? Can I just
Okay,
get a paper
yeah.
towel, please?
oh, for sure, yeah. And then we'll come back for 5.5, which is going to be the deputy mayor. So
forgive me, mayor and council, I just have a question about the parade. You were wanting the Ronge Avenue shut down, or would you like us to do the parade as normal?
So it says,
As in, like, do you want barricades on each side street, or just kind of like the parade where we march along?
so as the draft states, from Buckland Street to Boardman Street would be in effect from 10 a.m. until 1 p.m. on Friday, the 1st of July, to hold the Canada Day celebrations. And I mean that's essentially it, right? And then the road closure would go along from the Lac Ronge Indian Band office to Patterson Park in effect 10 a.m. to 11. So essentially the parade would start from the Lac Ronge Indian Band, go along the Ronge Avenue, and then the closure would happen along from Buckland Street to Boardman Street. So essentially closing that all down for any foot traffic.
Oh, I see. Okay, so just that one section there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, great. We move on to 5.5, which is the deputy mayor conversation. So no, I will agree with you, Councillor Clausen. It is the will of council. So if we want to move ahead today with appointing a new deputy, we absolutely can. But that's will of council, or we can table it to the next one. Go ahead.
I would agree. I don't think we did ever vote, Mayor, about who was sitting in the next position. Somebody would just offer, and if nobody else said, yeah, no, I want to be, then that person just...
So do we want to move ahead today with deciding consensus?
Well, sure.
On the first term, Councillor McPhail did about 14 months, which was not in line with what we originally decided. So then I got appointed. If everybody does 6 months, I would do an additional, I would give my turn again to complete the cycle. Because that's the way that everything goes. So rather than change signing authority, if I went on till middle of October, everybody else would get 6 months. After that, complete their 6 month term.
But when you were appointed, it was also decided at this table that we would switch it every 6 months. So it was already decided.
So if you did that, I would do the last 3 months. You did, because Jordan already had 14, so he's not going to get another turn.
But the problem is that the motion that was set when you went into that position,
Yeah.
we said we would set it every 6 months from that
Okay,
time.
so that's fine.
So that motion was
So I'll
already,
get
was
to
already
last 3
passed.
months then.
Yeah,
Okay.
so, okay, so is there anybody that is okay, first of all, does everybody want to make a decision tonight?
I would prefer not to, but
Okay,
We can if you want. I'll just say straight out, I have no interest at this time.
I just know, this would just be a question that we wanted to decide tonight, so just a simple yes or no.
Yes.
Yes.
Joe? Yes or no? Do you wanna make the decision tonight?
Oh, that's fine. Yeah.
Okay, and Vivian?
Sure, yeah.
Okay, so we're gonna go ahead tonight. Is there anyone that wants to nominate themselves or nominate somebody else?
I would stand.
Okay,
I'm interested as well.
okay. Anybody else?
I'll nominate Councillor Roos.
Thank
Okay.
you.
I'm trying to find a name. I can't find a name. Anybody else interested? Okay, so we've got Councillor Bashar and Councillor, I'm gonna roll my R without rolling it, Reese.
Microphone on.
Okay, and you can vote for yourself in this, so Councillor Bashar. I'm assuming for yourself, yes, okay. Councillor Edery,
I'll go with Viviana.
okay. Councillor Glasson,
Councillor Roos.
okay. Councillor Whiskey,
I'll go with the majority.
okay.
I'll go with-
Okay. Great, so, Councillor Reese, you will move into the deputy,
Give a formal motion after.
yeah, when we come out of, committee of all. So that will be for a 6-month period, so until December, on or around December 28th.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Okay,
You're welcome.
and then 5.6, Public Works, Councillor Clausen, did you wanna go ahead?
Yeah, just, excuse me, had a couple of questions for Public Works, just on some items that are probably happening this summer, just kind of wondering when those will happen or if they are. So the first one is line painting. Do we have line painting scheduled for this year, Dwayne?
Yeah.
Yeah, we got it, yeah.
We are looking into getting paint. We're having a hard time finding highway paint. We are able to acquire a few cans, which might result in us to only doing crosswalks. But as we drove around, a lot of the orange paint is still highly visible, so we might be able to get away with just doing our crosswalks as we plan to do.
Okay.
So, other than that, I believe, I think the only thing we can only cover at this time is crosswalks. With the amount of paint we have available.
Okay, perfect. So that's something that Public Works is gonna do, though it's not, you're not bringing in a private contractor to do road painting or anything this year. Is that on next year's schedule then?
The only time we ever bring in a contractor to do our line painting is our step down Main Street and main arteries. We usually get highways to go and do the center lines for us.
Okay, perfect. Next one is calcium on the gravel roads in town. Do we know when that's coming?
It is scheduled to arrive tomorrow.
Okay, perfect. Next one, and this might be partly finance here too. Grass cutting in ditches. So in the highway, it's typically the responsible of Department of Highways, or the responsibility of Department of Highways, but previously the town has tendered to some local contractors to deal with that as well, because highways typically only does it once a year if they even get to it, and it's driving through our community. It would be nice to have it looking good. Is there any plan for doing that this year?
Not that I was aware of, that wasn't on my radar, but I could definitely look into that.
It's something that was done previously, and it just kind of dresses up the community nicely and looks good once in a while. The last one is specifically the potholes by highway access on Boardman out to the highway, right by the co-op station there. It again is the responsibility of Department of Highways. Can we ask administration sends a letter asking them to repair those immediately? Or alternatively, that the town fixes them and invoices highways for it?
Yeah, we actually have those filled in today. Those, the ones right at Boardman coming onto the highway.
Oh, okay.
We went in and filled them in just because of the potentially had one for it.
Oh, okay.
And, I did reach out to highways to see when they're gonna be continuing with their old patching. Cause we did get a few calls about the main highway itself that has, it's not our job to fill those, but we have been getting a couple calls about those getting filled as well.
Okay, so are you gonna invoice them for the work you did then?
For that section there, technically we borrowed some cold mix from them before we received ours. So we're kind of
Doing a
working
trade.
out a situation there where we repaired those holes for this time around.
Okay, sounds good. And I guess that's something we could look into, Trevor, with that grass cutting in the ditches too, if we tendered and had it done, if highways would be willing to cover that cost back too, so that the municipality's not covering it.
Okay.
I do have a question about all those questions actually. Is this policy driven or are we getting into operations here?
Or residents complaining about things not being done.
Okay, but like if that's the case, then why are we not creating policy that Mr. Barassi then can contribute to?
I think policy's there, but sometimes things have to be nudged along a little bit. I'm just asking questions on when these things are gonna be happening.
Okay, no, I'm just curious, that's all. Go ahead, Councilor Baker.
Yeah, I think billing back to highways is an appropriate thing to do, removing their responsibilities and taking it onto ourselves and making the town taxpayers pay for that is not a great idea. Because really in the end it's their responsibility to take care of the cold mix. Yeah, cool, I don't mind like the tradesy thing every once in a while, I get that, but mowing ditches that's not our responsibility, that's theirs. They need to be doing that.
Okay, any other questions? Alright, so we just need a motion to rise and report.
I move to rise and report.
Second. Okay, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say nay. Alright, so we will put a couple motions on the table here. First for the bylaw to close the portion of Orange Avenue.
So that I move that the Council of the Town of Orange, Province of Saskatchewan, in open meeting and acts as follows to temporarily close the roadway along Orange Avenue from the Lac Orange Indian Band Office to Patterson Park, in effect from 10 a.m. until 11 a.m. on Friday, the 1st of July, 2022, to hold the Canada Day Parade. And two, this temporarily closed the roadway described as a portion of Orange Ave from Backlund Street to Boardman Street, in effect from 10 a.m. till 1 p.m. on Friday, the 1st of July, 2022, to hold Canada Day celebrations.
I'll second that.
Okay, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say nay. Okay, the motion is
So
carried.
that was read a first time.
You're right, there are three here.
Sorry.
No, so then we need a second reading.
I'll move the second reading.
Thank you. Okay, all in favor say aye.
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 And then we need a unanimous from the
Third.
table.
I'll move the third.
Thank you. All in favor say aye. Aye. We need unanimous for that. Oh, go ahead, Chief. Chief Platt.
Hi, sorry, I was wondering if I could make a suggestion on road closure. My apologies. For the location, if we could switch it to Backlund to Olson Street, that way we don't have to affect residents up on Olson Street from gaining access to their homes. And then it also just kind of makes it easier for us to manage one business in organizing that with them, rather than that whole stretch.
Okay, are we good for a friendly amendment to that?
Council Clausen did ask Robbie if there was any issues from residents, and they've been notified, so.
No, but this is for the parade, not the from
Something
Lakeland.
different.
Okay.
Is everyone good with the friendly amendment to that? So
Yes.
Buckland Street
Yes.
to Olson Street? Okay, and then.
My apologies, Council, thank you.
No, that's okay, I missed your hand there too. Okay, so I just need a unanimous decision to read the third time. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye, all opposed say nay. and then read for the third time and
I'll
adopt
move
it.
to read for the third time.
I'll second.
Okay, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say nay. Okay, motion is carried. We move on to the deputy mayor appointment, and
I'll nominate Councillor Ruiz for deputy mayor for the next 6 months.
perfect. So,
Second it.
and then for the next 6 months, so be on or around June 28th, whenever that council
Closest
meeting is.
meeting.
December.
Perfect. And then we just need an addition to that, if you don't mind, just about signing authority. So,
Oh, and two.
okay, excellent. Need a second, please.
I'll second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed say nay. Okay, motion is carried. All right, I just need to get back to my agenda here. Okay, great. We're moving on to bylaws, which is 6.1. Bylaw number 660/22 road closure bylaw. Request for decision from council, as presented here from Robbie Bender. There is a lot of motions here, just so that we can continue.
6 motions. Okay, I will move that we give a second reading to bylaw 660-22, being a bylaw to close a portion of Trombley Street.
Seconder?
I'll second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say nay. Motion's carried.
I'll move the third reading and adoption.
Okay, seconder?
I'll second.
Okay, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say nay. Motion's carried. Third motion.
I'll move second reading of bylaw 661/22, close Trombley Street and OCP amendment.
I'll second that.
Okay, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say nay. Motion's carried.
I'll move third reading and adoption.
Seconder?
I'll second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say nay. Motion's carried. Motion number 5 there.
I'll move that bylaw 622/22, bylaw to amend 572/16 be read a second time.
I'll
Seconder?
second that.
Okay, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say nay. Motion's carried. The last one.
I'll move that we give a third reading to bylaw 662-22 to amend zoning bylaw 572-16.
Seconder?
I'll second.
Thank you. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say nay. Motion is carried. Thank you for that. All right, we move on to go to 6.4, which is bylaw 663/22, request for decision for the parks bylaw, as presented here by Mr. Hannon, and that the recommendation here is that council proceed with option A.
I'll move that council give a second reading to parks bylaw 663/22.
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say nay. Motion's carried.
I'll move third reading and adoption.
Seconder?
I'll second.
Thank you. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say nay. Motion is carried. We move on to, oh goodness here. 6.5, which is the bylaw of 664/22 to amend OCP for lot 1, block M, plan 82 PA 138827.
I'll move second reading.
First reading, isn't it?
First
Oh,
reading.
it's first reading?
First reading.
Oh, sorry.
That's
My-
okay.
I'll second.
Okay, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say nay. Motion's carried. And then that counts.
That was 664, correct?
Yeah.
And so I move first, was that 665 means its own, right?
Yeah, we're on 6.5, yeah, and then it's, yeah, 665 means it's, yeah.
I move to amend zoning bylaw 665/22.
I'll second.
Okay, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed say nay. Motion is carried. Move on to that was 6.6, so 6.7.
Oh,
There are a lot of bylaws.
lucky number.
Alright, so the council proceeds with option A to give all 3 readings to bylaw 66/22, being a bylaw to amend the Schedule C of taxi bylaw.
Okay, I'll move that we give the second reading.
Okay, seconder?
I'll second.
Okay, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say nay. Motion is carried.
Shouldn't it be first reading that one? First,
Mhm.
second, and then unanimous?
Yeah, because it's got second, third.
There's just a typo in that thing, I
My
think.
apologies.
Oh, there's a typo.
So
yes.
first reading, amended to first reading?
Yeah, that's,
Okay.
I'll move second reading then.
I'll second.
okay, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye, all opposed say nay.
I'll move that council consider all three readings, of 66622.
And this needs to be unanimous, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye, all opposed say nay. And last one there.
I'll move that council give third reading to 66622.
Amend Schedule C of taxi bylaw, just so everyone knows what we're talking about.
Yeah, seconder.
I'll second it.
Okay, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye, all opposed say nay. Motion is carried. Alright, we move to 6.8, which is the bylaw 667 for the mill rate and base tax bylaw.
Oh, do we need to repeal
We have to repeal
48705?
487.
Yeah.
So I'll move to
you're correct,
repeal
thank
bylaw 48705. That was the original taxi bylaw.
you. That's correct.
Okay.
I'll second. I'll second.
Thank you. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye, all opposed say nay. Okay, the motion is carried. I'm just gonna check in with Allison because I know
Sorry,
I'm
there's
not
a
sure.
lot.
No, is that, I just wanna make sure that we covered everything. I think so.
We've never done business so quickly.
I know. Well, actually, the repeal technically needs three
Repeal?
readings, doesn't it?
The repeal's on the bylaw, I'm sorry.
Oh, the repeal is in
Is the bylaw.
66622?
That's what I was just
Yeah,
checking.
correct.
So you shouldn't have to have separate.
Okay.
motions for that.
Okay,
It's
okay.
already in there.
Okay,
I
excellent.
adopted the new bylaw, repealed it was a clause in there to repeal the other one.
Perfect.
Sorry for the confusion.
Okay, no, thank you for
I
clearing
was
that
just
up.
checking that actually.
Okay, great, so then we can move on to 6.8, right?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. 6.8, request for decision for bylaw 667/22, the council proceed with option A to give all three readings for bylaw 667, being the bylaw to determine the mill rate and base tax by the following motions.
I'll move the first reading of bylaw 66722.
I
Second
got
that.
one question
Go ahead.
on that. On the base tax, I know we, in the fall time, I think we abated a property that had two base tax on the same property. There are other properties that have two base taxes on it, on the same property. Only because part is residential and part is commercial. But the base tax was always implemented to reflect service that you received. That's the base, every property is provided service. So how can you get two services for the same lot?
Is it consolidated?
It's unfair.
Are those lots consolidated?
What do you mean in consolidated?
Like
Oh, it's a
Combined
single
into one.
Oh, is it single
No,
lot?
there is one
And
lot.
two base taxes are applied if you have, out in the industrial area, the homes that have a house as a residential use and the commercial use, am I
Yeah.
correct? So
Oh, I
those
see.
that use a property for two purposes within commercial zoning, I believe, or
Yeah.
have a base tax applied twice, one for the residential, one for the commercial. But those do reflect services, and my understanding that there are different services
But-
generally that are applied to
Originally, the base
businesses
tax
and
Hold on 1 second.
and residences, so
Okay.
there's like the water and sewer for residents, there's the roads, the this, the that, so the additional usage of roads and whatever might apply. But it's an interesting and tricky subject.
But initially, when base tax was implemented, and I was in office when that came into effect, and that was the purpose of it. And the reason it was brought in was because there was vacant properties that were not paying any tax, but yet you had to grade the snow in front of it, and so that's when it was originally brought in. And then somehow along the way, it was expanded by somebody to include two property classes on the same property.
So policy-wise, is that something that's been requested from administration to look into?
Well, I've had a request from someone, so I brought it to,
Is that
just
requested
for a
in somewhere?
question.
Do we know?
Well, he did ask me to look into it. Lyle had asked me just to put the bylaw forth and that way we could have the discussion about it at that time.
So having had this question in advance, what's the impact?
Well, there's 39 properties that have both,
Mm-hmm.
and it would be about $27,000 to change that. So we could go about it if we wanted to a couple different ways. We could get rid of it altogether and there'd be a $27,000 hit to our budget. We could also look at getting rid of it and then possibly raising the property taxes for all business owners to cover that $27,000.
Mm-hmm.
In which case, you'd probably want to not approve this bylaw, and I could come back with the other one next meeting.
Does anybody in this room, does this affect anyone in this room currently?
At least 2 individuals, yes.
Okay, thank you.
With this, from a taxation perspective, why would this have been put in place, or why would this have been applied in this way? I'm just wondering if you understand the rationale behind it, or if there's other examples that you've seen in other places of how this kind of thing is approached.
Well, first of all, like, I did contact our taxing software program,
Yeah.
and they said that, like, municipalities, there's been some that have gone either way, so that there is precedent for either way to do that. So I mean, it's up to you guys, however you want to do it. I did have a conversation with Lyle, and he did say, like, you know, if you do have a property, if you have a business owner that has a property, residential and commercial on different lots, it kind of puts them at a fair playing field with someone that has both on one lot. But then there is the situation that Councillor Rodriguez brought up.
And following up from that question, so there's 2 base taxes applied, and there's 2 mill rates applied, or 2 like
There is 2 mill rates, which would be
Yeah.
normal because that is
Yeah.
based on the amount there, but the base taxes are just an extra amount that are added on.
right for the basic services that the municipality provides to
And the
properties.
base tax in the commercial rate is higher than the residential
Yeah,
rate.
by $100.
Something like that.
Okay.
And then that's what you were talking earlier about services that are all included, or that
Yeah.
those properties might use more services.
Mm-hmm.
The services received are the same in those areas, other than there's no pavement, so it's actually less. And the water and sewer and waste collection fee is considerably higher than it is in residential areas.
Councillor Frederick?
It kind of, you know, I see Abby's point on it, because if a person is running a business, let's say downtown here, and they got to pay their property tax because they live on Lawton Crescent, they're having to pay two property taxes, right? My question is, because I know there's residents that live downtown above a business, let's say, or they being provided.
Those would be 2 base taxes.
They're 2 base taxes as well?
Yeah.
Okay.
So does council wish to have further clarification on this bylaw before we go ahead, or is council's will to move ahead?
I think we should move ahead.
I think for this year,
I think it's worth
this has been kind of status quo for the last few years.
Well, at least going back 10 years, like, I went through a lot of old bylaws.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think for the fact of our, like, the state of our budgets and where we're at, and, you know, $27,000 potentially we could need every last dime this year with all the infrastructure that we have going on, and it's not to say that I don't understand where properties that have both uses are coming from, but this matter maybe could be addressed better in next year's budget, and there be scenarios brought forward, like the time to actually create the scenarios to bring forward how we might better address those particular properties to maybe have a combined base tax for a dual use property or something, where it would balance, not be so much of a perceived penalty versus what we have going on.
Okay, so the recommendation that's on the agenda from administration, and then we can see if it goes through. And if it doesn't, then it doesn't, and then administration wants to go back, and otherwise, I mean, it's definitely a consideration for next year's budget, because we have already had this conversation about it. So someone want to go ahead with the first motion?
Already done.
Perfect.
It was seconded.
Great. Okay, all in favor say aye.
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 Aye. Got 3 ayes. Okay, all opposed say nay. 1 nay.
Mhm.
Okay, so the motion's carried.
Move the second reading.
I'll second that.
Okay, all in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say nay. Okay, the motion is carried. Move on to number 3.
I'll move third and final reading.
Just we
Consider
consider 3
three.
Oh, sorry, consideration for third and final.
And we unanimous for this, so all in favor say aye. Aye. Councillor Reese, are you?
Nay.
You're nay, okay. Alright, so it just leaves it the first 2 readings. So that motion is denied, and we're moving on.
What are you opposed to, Councillor Roos?
Well, I don't think it's a fair practice. I think we need to maybe just by reading it, I just think we need to look at it a little closer just to make sure that everybody's needs are being met. Because right now it doesn't seem like everybody's needs are being met, so I'd just like it to be a little more fair.
So do you want to request administration to provide any further detail?
Yeah, I think that would be beneficial. I'd like to make a more informed decision. I feel I don't know
Do you
enough.
wanna
I
get
don't see this fair right now, so.
Do you want to give specifics just so that you try to bring that back to law?
I think if you could just, create some scenarios that kind of explain the situation a little better, that would be important for me anyway.
Impact budget wise, how are we gonna what is the impact on, from the perspective of a scenario, what is the impact on the greater business community, and their taxation if a property is, that base tax, the commercial?
Like the double
well,
tax.
yeah, what's
Double tax, right?
Would we only be applying residential based tax, or would we only be applying commercial based tax to those particular properties that have both? And then what impact, you mentioned that taxes would have to be raised in general to make up that shortfall if we were looking at trying to have that same tax revenue to work with. What would the impact be on the business community if that was put on the business community?
Yeah, and is there if we could create a beneficial combination base tax, right? Because it's sort of like if somebody's investing, you're living in the community, plus they're have a business wherever and they're paying twice, right? I guess it seems fair, but is it really fair? Because it's like a double investment in the community, right? So, and money wise, does that even really impact us big picture, right? Are we talking about pennies, or are we talking about thousands and thousands of dollars?
We're talking about $27,000, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, 27,000 total, but per business owner, I could probably find out pretty quickly what it would come out to.
There's more in town, and that's what I was saying for those individuals, right? And then we're gonna have everybody saying, well, I wanna live above my store, and then just pay the one tax.
The one base tax.
Yeah, so that's.
But maybe there's a scenario that works that way, and maybe there's a scenario that people feel more fairly taxed.
Okay, it needs to be fair, right? I don't know how I'd feel. If I'm gonna have a business here, which I don't, and I probably never will, but let's say I want some sort of tax relief, even if it was minimal, even if it was a minimum discount. Okay, you have a personal property and you have a commercial property. I'd like to see some sort of benefit, because that's how we're gonna attract new investment in the community as well, right? So.
There is better incentives for that. Councillor Roos, given the first, 3 years tax free or whatever. There's better incentives to attract businesses rather than.
Okay, no, and I agree. So let's implement that, because we've talked about it. We've talked about benefits to attract new people to the community, new investments. We've talked about giving tax breaks, so maybe it's time we actually create some of those policies and put them into place.
And anecdotally, I'll just offer that LaRange is pretty competitive when it comes to taxation. In other communities that I've lived in, taxation has been way higher, and they've had less services.
Right.
So I think administration, you've gathered enough that we might need, unless you have any further questions, Trevor. Okay, perfect. Let's move on. Moving on to business, which is the first one is 7.1 from a request for decision for an RMT business, and the recommendation is that council proceed with option A to direct staff to initiate a discretionary use application process for a home-based business known as Renee Markworth, registered massage therapist on lot 43, block 38, plan 80 PA 19051.
Also move.
Seconder?
I'll second.
Okay, any further questions, comments, concerns? Okay, we'll call the question. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed say nay. Motion is carried. We went to 7.2, which is the lot consolidation request. That's, and the recommendation here is that council approve option A. Council approves the request for the consolidation of lots 10 and 11 on block 51 plan 102079874.
We'll move that council approve the request for consolidation.
Seconder?
I'll second.
I'm gonna open up to any further questions, comments?
What street is this? Just curious.
Robertson Drive.
Oh, okay, that's where I thought. Okay, yeah, I'm in
And
favor.
it was, they had requested
Mhm.
2 other lots before, and then they're just changing those.
Yeah, I'm in favor.
So now we just lost one base tax too, just so everyone's clear.
Okay. Alright, all in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say nay. Motion is carried. We're going to 7.3, which is request decision for the snow loader purchase and awarding the tender, I guess. Is that what it is? So it's the council proceed with option A, approve the purchase of a 2-stage loader mounted snow blower and recommended options from Falcon Equipment Limited in the amount of $168,004 plus GST.
Also move.
Okay, seconder.
I'll second.
Any questions on?
Question for Mr. Morowski, is there a big difference between these 2 units? Like, is one a better quality?
There's not so much of a big difference, more of accessibility. So one is actually stationed out of Alberta, was their closest, well, their base of operations would be based out of Alberta, which would take us longer if we were to have to order anything maintenance wise, and then the other one's based out of Regina.
Okay. But the machines themselves are comparable qualities?
Yeah, both of them basically met all of what we were looking for posted up in our tender. So they are basically the same quality of machine.
Okay.
Alright, any further comments? Alright, we'll call the question. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed say nay. Motion is carried. We move on to 7.4. Trying to miss anything here. Town policy resolution or request for decisions. These are all lumped together from the special meeting that happened. And that council proceed with option A, approve the following policies, which I
I'll
know
move
is
that council approve all the following policies or all the policies as presented.
I'll second.
And further that the following policies be rescinded? Cause there's a list of,
Sure.
yeah.
Okay.
As per the list presented.
Yes, yeah, because the top
Like a
ones
CEO.
are the ones that come in, and then the ones below that are rescinded. So the ones that go into place are expense reimbursement policy,
Reimbursement?
hours of work policy, business and training approval policy, compensation policy, gift awards and promotional items policy, hiring policy, leave policy, purchasing disposal policy, code and conduct policy, use of municipal asset policy, disclosure and discipline policy, and then to rescind the policy. Following policies: personnel policy manual, council rumination policy, performance policy, upward communication, credit card policy, salary continuation policy, purchasing policy. Wow, I need a seconder for that, and then we'll
Which
have questions.
policy is the one with the meal allowances in?
Sorry, can I just get a seconder first?
I second.
Okay, go ahead.
Which policy is the meal allowance in? Because we were talking the other day, somebody suggested $50 a flat fee for the day, which is very contradictory of what everybody else does. Government rates breakfast, dinner, supper, and we've always followed government rates and all. Like if somebody goes for a supper, say you gotta travel in the afternoon and you go to Saskatoon for a Tuesday morning conference, you're only entitled to supper, not $50 for a whole day. It's
I
just,
believe we did settle that discussion.
nobody
did we
does
not?
that.
That's number 1 on there, the
Yeah.
expense reimbursement.
Yes.
$50.
Municipal meal per diem is $50 per day or portion thereof, but doesn't specify what portion thereof is. I guess that's what you're getting at, that you want it.
Well, basically, if you don't have individual rates in your policy, then what do you follow? You don't-
Well, it says,
you can't just give a supper because you don't have a rate for it. You just made it $50 for the day. Nobody does that. You point at anybody that does one
I don't
flat fee for
think it's, well, my understanding of the conversation is that the few dollars plus or minus is not necessarily worth dickering about, and
no, but it flows
And
into council as well. So when we're traveling to go to Suma and we leave at
Sunday.
noon,
if
At
somebody
two.
brings an orange with them
Saskatoon.
and that's all they need to eat for the day, I trust that our staff are not gonna claim it.
what about trust?
And if they do,
It's about managing
then
the
that's a benefit
public
of-
funds.
yeah.
It's about managing the public funds.
It's also
That's what it's
being
about.
fair in compensation when.
So, sorry, can I just jump in here really quick? I was not at the conversation and I apologize for that. So what was the consensus at this table?
I thought it was
Well-
$51 a day was
There was
the,
no,
was
you
the
know,
addition of the breakfast,
there was no
lunch,
profit
and
for
dinner.
supper, rates.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of saying, well, if you travel this time and then you travel this time, or if you only travel this time and you travel that time, to avoid the calculation and whatever, if you're traveling, you can claim $50.
if you added the 3 meals together, you got 51.
Yeah.
And yet, if you go with a $50 rate, you're actually getting $1 less. So where's the looking after your staff or whoever?
If a person left at lunch, they could get $25.
Those traveling for business and or training are eligible for accommodation expense reimbursement prior to or at the end of scheduled business and or training that's needed to avoid travel. That would need to commence prior to 7, continue past 9, and there's enough guidance and policy in here that it covers abuse of
It
the
does.
claim.
So if you're only
Yeah.
entitled to supper and you're going to get $50 for supper,
Yeah,
that's not abuse.
no?
That's mismanagement by us.
What,
putting
are
that
we,
policy in place.
are we asking our staff to only ever go get McDonald's for supper?
Yeah, but that
Cause
that
that's all
rate
you can
comes-
get.
Alright,
that
so
rate- that rate will go for not only staff, it'll go for us too.
Yeah,
Trevor, what's the budget implication for this? And we talked about it at the last meeting, but for the expenditures for meals that are covered by staff and council combined, what is that total in a year? $2,000 maybe?
Yeah, it's pretty negligible.
Yeah,
It's,
I
I guess it's
think,
the principle of it.
I think Lyle did have a note there, like the per diems, the mileage, and then the implications of bereavement and sick leave and all those other things that were, he said it would, and that also includes the annual awards banquet, but variable, but estimated 15,000 a year or
For
less.
all of,
For all
for
of
the
that.
entire thing,
All those implications.
not just for
those,
the
yeah.
meal one.
Not just the meals, yeah, it would be, because it's variable, it's very hard to determine.
Mm-hmm.
and administration was supportive of this because the administration of this particular per diem rate for meals was easy. It was streamlined. So I think that's one of the main reasons that I was supporting that.
Okay, well, we do have a motion on the table unless there's any other further comments to add. So we'll call the question. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say nay. Okay, motion is carried. We move on to 7.5, which is temporary use permits.
Declare and move
Thank
through.
you. So I will read this really quick. So this is a request for permission to allow 2 to 3 sea cans to be placed on lot 1, 2, 3, and 6, block 4, plan 79 PA 10793 is a discretionary use, which I believe,
Doing that.
yeah, it's the KFC building.
KFC and additional lots or just, oh, okay, yes. Okay, does anybody else need to see that?
And I'll just give you a little bit more background really quick. It's just to allow for the sea cans to contribute to site cleanliness and help to limit the visual distraction of construction site on Orange Avenue. Attached to the site plan, which we just have left the location we need to change, however, we're in the property. Okay.
I move to approve the request from Highmark
I'll
Holdings.
give you that.
I'll second that.
If you can just read that one, it's only that.
Oh, for sure. I move that council approves this request from Highmark Holdings for temporary use development for a shipping container at the location legally described as lots 1, 3, and 6, block 4, plan 79 PA 10793, in order to facilitate construction located in the C1 General Commercial District for the period of time commencing July 4th, 2022 to December 30th, 2022.
Second?
I'll second.
Okay, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed say nay. Perfect, motion's carried. Counselor Clausen?
So do you have another addition to
No, that was, I didn't realize it was
In
already.
camera, I think you
Oh,
said.
In camera, yeah. We're gonna take a recess though.
Thank you.
So let's just motion to in camera and then we'll take a short recess.
I'll move that we go in camera.
I'll second.
Okay, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All in favor say nay. Good 10-minute recess.
Whole 10 minutes?